Good day, my name is Noelle Medina, and for today we will be discussing basic chemical bonding. So, a chemical bond is a lasting attraction between atoms, ions, or molecules that enables the formation of chemical compounds. The bond may result from the electrostatic force of attraction between oppositely charged ions, that is called the ionic bond, or through the sharing of electrons, which is called covalent bonds. Now, before we dive deep into the types of chemical bonding, what is the role of chemical bonding in our everyday lives? As said in the presentation, this complex question has a very simple answer, which is everything. The reason for this is because chemical bonding happens everywhere around us. It happens involuntarily from things we see with our naked eye or through molecular activity. Meaning, yung mga nakikita natin but hindi natin nakikita or kahit nakikita natin or hindi natin nakikita, may nangyayari pa din na chemical bonding. So, a good example of this is breathing out, which forms carbon dioxide, which is a form of compound. And a good example of this then is yung activity ng earth below, yung pagmimix ng metals natin dyan, that is metallic bonding. But let's move forward. So before we proceed to the types of chemical bonding, there are two important terms in this discussion. First is valence electrons. Valence electrons are basically the outer shell electrons of an atom. And next naman is octet rule, which is the tendency of atoms to prefer to have 8 electrons in the valence shell. Now, for compounds, the octet rule is important because it is the key to the stabilization of a specific compound. Ayan. Now, for the three types of chemical bonding, we have ionic bonds, covalent bonds, and metallic bonds. And these are actually arranged according to their strength of bonding. The strongest rather, is metallic bonds, followed by covalent bonds and ionic bonds. First, we have ionic bonds. Ionic bonds are known to be bonds between metals and non-metals. So remember lang, ionic bonds, metals, and non-metals. So it is an electron exchange that results in an electrostatic attraction between the two atoms. They are a class of chemical bonds that result from the exchange of one or more valence electrons from an atom or from one atom, typically a metal, to another, typically a non-metal. So tandaan lang natin na ang bond, it's an exchange of an ionic bond rather is an exchange of valence electrons between two atoms. And just to add to that, chemical bonding in general is the attraction between two or more atoms. So the key word in ionic bonds is exchange. Lagi itong tatandaan. Ionic bonds exchange their valence electrons. And to explain that further, a good example is sodium fluoride. Sodium fluoride is known to be one of the simple examples of ionic bonding. As you can see here in the presentation, we have Na, which is the sodium element or sodium atom, and then we have F, as in the fluorine atom or the fluorine element. Now, sodium has one valence electron while fluorine has 7. Now, in order for them to combine and to obey the octet rule, sodium has to exchange its one valence electron, while fluorine has to exchange its 7 valence electrons to form sodium chloride. So just remember exchange. Now, moving forward to the covalent bonds, this happens between non-metals and non-metals. So sa isa't isa lang. It occurs when pairs of electrons are shared by atoms. Atoms will covalently bond with other atoms in order to gain more stability, which is gained by forming a full electron shell. Or yun nga, obeying the octet rule. Now, this is more complicated or more complex than ionic bonds. And to explain that, we need to know that the key word of this bond is share. So, covalent bonds share their valence electrons as compared to ionic bonds na nag-exchange, ang covalent bonds naman ay nag-share. A good example is carbon tetrafluoride. Carbon has 4 valence electrons and fluorine has 7. Now, as you can see sa illustration, sa left, papakita doon na kailangan nila mag-share. And as you can see sa illustration sa right, meron tayong white dot doon. So, imagine that this white dot is the valence electron that carbon is sharing with fluorine. Ngayon, if you look at the illustration, fluorine has 8 valence electrons na, which means that it obeys the octet rule. However, carbon has 5. Given yung isa, sinishare ni fluorine sa kanya. Now, how does this become stable? How does this become a compound? Since si carbon, 5 pa lang yung valence electrons. So, ang gagawin nga, as you can see, it's carbon tetrafluoride, which means tetra, there are 4 other atoms of fluorine. So, that means na si carbon, kailangan niya ng 4 other fluorine atoms para mabuo yung octet niya or yung valence electrons niya to obey the octet rule. So as you can see in the description, for it to be stable, carbon needs to find 4 different fluorine atoms for it to obey the octet rule and have a total of 8 valence electrons. Ayun. Just remember, ionic is exchange, covalent is share. Now lastly, I want you to forget the other two na nauna kasi metallic bonds is more complex than the other two simply because it doesn't share the same properties dun sa dalawa na nag-share and nag-exchange ng valence electrons. Now, metallic bonds by its name happens between metals. So, of course, metallic bonds, metals to metals. So, it is known for its unique attribute where the electrons roam freely within their molecular orbits away from their parent nuclei. I'm gonna show you later. Because of this, the metal is strongly held together by the forces of attraction between the positively charged nuclei and the negatively charged electrons na nagro-roam dun sa ating compound or sa ating molecule. Now, the keyword in this bond is the sea of electrons. Ayun yung tinatawag sa kanya ng mga naka-discover or naka-research tungkol sa metallic bonding. And why? Why do they call it the sea of electrons? As you can see in this illustration, there are white circles and red dots. Now, yung white circles, they are the positively charged nucleus. And a nucleus, as we know, nandun yung positively charged atoms and neutrally charged atoms, which is the proton and the neutron. And then yung red naman, those are the electrons which are negatively charged. Ngayon, the unique thing about metallic bonding is once na nag-bond na siya, yung mga electrons niya umiikot lang away from the parent nuclei or yun sa pinanggalingan niyang nucleus. So a good example of this is aluminum foil, iron and gold bars, copper wires, and other metal compounds. So another unique thing about metallic bonding is that it can happen even with only one element na madaming atoms. So ayun. That is all. To wrap this up, let's summarize what we have discussed. Remember, ionic is the exchange of valence electrons. Covalent is the sharing of valence electrons. And metallic naman is where the electrons roam or is called the sea of electrons. So that is all for today. Thank you for listening and I hope that you have learned something.